All right, ready to dive into some more real estate.
Always. Let's do it.
Looks like our listeners are interested in a unique kind of agent, the exclusive buyer's agent.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is that unlike other agents, these folks only work for the buyer.
Right. They never represent sellers.
Never, which is pretty different from what we normally see.
Yeah, you don't see this model everywhere. It's more common in certain areas where you have strong buyer-broker real estate companies, like the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area.
Makes sense. So they're set up specifically to prevent any conflicts of interest.
Exactly. Those pop up in more traditional real estate firms.
I read one article that used this great analogy of one team, one locker room to describe this loyalty to the buyer.
I like that.
Yeah, you've got your agent. They're completely dedicated to you, just like a sports team going for that championship.
And they're all in your corner, focused on your success.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
It comes down to fiduciary duty. That means they are legally and ethically bound to put your interests above all else.
They're like your champion in the real estate arena.
Exactly.
I like it. So while other agents might be focused on, closing deals quickly or getting the highest price for the seller,
Right.
an exclusive buyer's agent is completely focused on the best possible outcome for the buyer.
Absolutely. They're your advocate, making sure you get the best possible deal, even if it means a smaller commission for them.
Right, because they're not worried about pleasing the seller or making your brokerage the most money.
It's all about your success as the buyer.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, we have some information about other types of agents that buyers might come across.
Sure, we do.
Can you walk us through those and how they compare to the exclusive buyer's agent? So tell me more about these other types of agents.
Well, the research you sent over uses these kind of funny nicknames to talk about the other agents you might meet. We've got Tom, Dick, and Harriet.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I chuckled when I saw that. Who are these characters in the real estate world?
Okay, Tom is your traditional agent. This is probably the agent you're most familiar with.
Okay, the one we all know.
Right. Usually works for a big brokerage that's really focused on listing homes for sale.
All about that marketing, the staging, open houses, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Their priority is to the seller. So they have a legal responsibility to get the seller the highest price.
Okay, so right there, I see a potential conflict. If their main goal is to get the seller top dollar, how can they also be looking out for the buyer?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's like the research put it well. They said it's two opposing teams in the same locker room.
I like that.
You and the seller, you want different things, and the traditional agent has to side with one of you.
Right, and then we've got Dick, who is the dual agent, which I find really fascinating.
Right.
So this is where the agent is actually representing both the buyer and the seller in the same deal,
Yeah.
which, on the surface, you're like, oh, that's easier. One agent, less to deal with.
Yeah.
But can an agent really be neutral in that situation?
It's tough. The research talked about how even if a dual agent is trying to be fair to both sides, their interests and the brokerage's interests might not be what's best for the buyer or the seller individually.
Right, it's that brokerage piece of it.
Yeah, and it can be confusing, especially for buyers who might not really understand what dual agency means.
It comes down to transparency,
Definitely.
which it sounds like that could be missing sometimes. All right, and finally we have Harriet. Who is this in our real estate sitcom?
Okay, so Harriet is our designated buyer's agent. Now, this type of agent works for the same company as Dick, the dual agent.
Okay, got it.
But they are specifically assigned to the buyer.
Okay, so they work at the same place as agents who rep sellers, but they're promising to be on your team as the buyer. I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical. How independent can they really be in that kind of setup?
Yeah, it's a good question. They might have the title of designated buyer's agent, but they're still part of a brokerage that represents both sides.
Right.
The article used a really interesting metaphor. They called it the hat trick. So while the agents might change roles, the broker at the top, they're always juggling both sides of the deal.
So even if this designated buyer's agent has good intentions,
Right.
they might feel torn, and their actions are still being influenced by their brokerage and its success.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that even with these designations, there can be other things influencing what an agent does.
It seems like all of this is super valuable for our listeners to understand when they're starting to look for a home. But let's bring it back to reality here. Why does all this matter to someone about to buy a house? Why should they care about Tom, Dick, and Harriet? And how does an exclusive buyer's agent change things for them?
Yeah, it's like having someone who's really on your side every step of the way.
Right.
But how does that actually work in real estate? What are the benefits for the buyer when they have an exclusive buyer's agent?
Well, it affects everything.
Okay.
From how much power you have in negotiations
Right.
to the information you can get.
Okay.
Even how confidential things are kept.
Gotcha.
So let's talk about negotiation first.
Yep.
Let's say you're interested in a house and it's listed by one of those traditional agents.
Right. Or Tom. Yeah, Tom. Now, their loyalty is to the seller.
Of course.
They're going to try to get the highest price possible.
Right. So in that situation, it's like they're on the other team, even if they're trying to be nice about it.
Yeah, you could say that their legal obligation is to the seller.
Right.
But an exclusive buyer's agent, they're free to negotiate hard for you, even if it means they make less money.
Okay.
They're not worried about making a seller mad who might be a client later on.
Makes sense.
Their only goal is to get you the best deal.
So it's not just about who they represent. It's also about, like you said, what their incentives are.
Exactly.
I hadn't thought of it like that before.
It makes a big difference.
It does.
And then there's the information part.
Okay.
Different types of agents, they have different rules about what they have to tell you. Like, let's say there's another house for sale that's similar but cheaper.
Okay.
A dual agent who's working for both sides.
Yeah.
They might not legally have to tell you about it.
Really?
Right, because it could mean the seller gets less money.
Wow.
But an exclusive buyer's agent,
Yeah.
they have to tell you everything that could help you, even if it means you don't buy a house through them.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It's like having a secret weapon, someone who's always looking out for you, making sure you know everything.
That's the idea.
Wow.
And lastly, there's confidentiality.
Oh.
When you're working with an exclusive buyer's agent, you know all your personal financial stuff,
Right.
your strategies for negotiation, all that stays private.
That's important.
They're on your side, and that needs trust that other agents can't always promise.
You know, this reminds me of something we read by Stephen Carpenter Israel.
Oh, yeah.
He's an expert on this buyer agency stuff.
Right.
He said something about undivided loyalty in real estate. How important it is to have an agent who's totally on your side.
It's true.
Buying a home is such a big decision.
Absolutely.
Personal, it's financial. You need someone you can trust.
It's more than just finding a house.
Right.
It's finding a place where you can really see your future.
Exactly.
And when you're feeling stressed or unsure,
Which happens to all of us.
of course.
It makes all the difference to have someone there just for you, looking out for you.
It really does.
So for our listeners who are starting to think about buying a home, what's the most important thing to remember?
When you're choosing an agent,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right.
See what your options are.
Yeah.
And think about if an agent who puts you first is the right choice for you.
Find someone who gets you, who understands your goals.
Right.
And who really wants to help you reach your dreams.
Exactly.
And maybe it's time to rethink the old way of doing things.
Maybe so.
Find a new path that puts you in control.
You got it.
I love that. You've given our listeners a lot to think about as they start this exciting journey.
It's a big step.
It is. And don't forget, we've got those links to everything we talked about in the show notes.
So you can learn even more.
That's right. So make sure you check those out. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Until next time, happy house hunting, everyone.